Hey everyone, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. And now a roundup of this week's enterprise IT news highlights. Like clockwork, our first story of an issue presented after recent Windows updates to begin this week's episode. Microsoft has released an emergency update to fix a Bluetooth device visibility issue on hot patch enabled Windows 11 24H2 or 25H2 enterprise devices. The Bluetooth devices will not appear in Windows settings or quick settings, even though they're functioning correctly and connected to affected systems. This bug could also prevent some users from adding new Bluetooth devices because available devices will not appear in the connection list, according to bleepycomputer.com. Microsoft pushed another Windows 11 Enterprise out-of-band hot patch, KB5084597, to patch 3 high-severity vulnerabilities in the Windows Routing and Remote Access Service, or RRAS, as you may know it. This is the RRAS management tool. And this could allow attackers to execute malicious code remotely when connecting to a malicious server if unpatched. Microsoft's advisory for this says, quote, an attacker authenticated on the domain could exploit this vulnerability by tricking a domain-joined user into sending a request to a malicious server via the routing and remote access service snap-in. This issue only applies to a limited set of scenarios involving enterprise client devices running hot patch updates and being used for remote server management, end quote. So interesting. On last week's episode, there was the announcement of a change coming in June for hot patch to be enabled by default on some systems. And then there's 2 out-of-band patches this week related to Windows update issues or vulnerabilities in the latter case. And they're specific to hot patch. I wonder if that's possibly at least partly due to a renewed focus on hot patch. I guess I can't know that. Only Microsoft engineers would know that. But interesting nonetheless on the timing. Microsoft is working to address a known issue that renders the classic Outlook email client unusable for users who have enabled the Microsoft Teams meeting add-in, which I would imagine would be an awful lot of those using the classic Outlook email client. According to bleepycomputer.com, if you want to temporarily fix the bug, you are advised to update Outlook or to perform an online repair for click-to-run installs. Microsoft is also investigating several issues that are causing email connection problems in the Outlook desktop client and triggering a 0x800CCC0F and or 0x800-757 errors during synchronization with Gmail and Yahoo accounts. And then on Monday, Microsoft also mitigated a widespread Exchange Online outage that prevented customers from accessing their mailboxes and calendars via Outlook on the web, Outlook desktop, Exchange ActiveSync, and other Exchange Online connection protocols. So a pretty rough time for Outlook and Exchange, not just this week, but it seems like it's been going on for the last couple of years. And maybe this touches to the general quality concerns around Microsoft products and updates in recent times, which I know I covered on the podcast previously, is something that Microsoft is looking to address, and they've had a change of leadership with the specific focus on improving quality. So hopefully that does come to fruition. Recently, Microsoft temporarily removed the Samsung app from the Microsoft Store after discovering that it was causing issues on Samsung Galaxy Book 4 and Samsung desktop models running Windows 11. On affected devices, users were experiencing problems accessing files, accessing the C drive, launching applications, or performing administrative tasks, and in some cases, issues elevating privileges, uninstalling updates, or collecting logs due to permission failures. Microsoft and Samsung published recovery guidance for affected systems, which requires users to follow a 29-step procedure to restore standard Windows permissions, and it can take up to 15 minutes to complete. Users must first sign in with an admin account, start the affected computer, uninstall the Samsung Galaxy Connect app, temporarily allow Windows to repair drive permissions, add a temporary permission, and then restore Windows default permissions using a batch repair file. After completing the full procedure, Windows system behavior should return to normal, with drive ownership restored to Windows Trusted Installer and the local disk opens normally. This process restores Windows default secure permissions on the system drive and does not modify or access personal files according to Microsoft. And if you still cannot access the C drive after completing all steps, you're being requested to contact Samsung support and reference C drive access issue caused by Galaxy Connect app permissions. Microsoft also advised affected Windows 11 users to contact Samsung for device specific assistance. To me, this is a pretty wild, crazy story. And it kind of begs the question of how an application could completely upend the secure permissions within the operating system and hijack the entire C drive. And then the further question is, if they pulled it from the Microsoft Store as a reaction to this, what's the quality like of applications in the Microsoft Store that this was available before the issues were being reported by users? A bad look all around. I know after the CrowdStrike Falcon sensor update, there was like this big campaign or concern internally within Microsoft, at least reportedly, that they needed to strip away the rights from third-party vendors for running processes and applications at the kernel level. So essentially, removing the ability to have kernel drivers in third-party applications. There's no indication necessarily that this was specifically a kernel driver issue, but of course, applications that are allowed to run with elevated permissions can do a whole lot of bad as well. So this is a pretty ugly situation. I wonder if it will lead to any other sort of architecture changes for applications in future. Google has released emergency security updates to patch two high severity Chrome vulnerabilities exploited in zero-day attacks. The first is CVE 2026 3909, and it stems from an out of bounds write weakness in Skia, which is an open source 2D graphics library responsible for rendering web content and user interface elements, which attackers can exploit to crash the browser or even gain code execution. And the second is CVE 2026 3910, and this is described as an inappropriate implementation vulnerability in the V8 JavaScript and WebAssembly engine. Our old friend V8 JavaScript leading to another vulnerability in Google Chrome here. Google discovered both security flaws and patched them within 2 days of reporting for users in the stable desktop channel, with new versions rolling out to Windows, macOS, and Linux systems. On details of the vulnerabilities, it said that access to bug details and links may be kept restricted until a majority of users are updated with the fix, and that Google will also retain restrictions if the bug exists in a third-party library that other projects similarly depend on but haven't yet fixed. Which I know if you've listened to the podcast for years, then you'll know that Google is always light on the details. So them suggesting that they might release more details in the future, I wouldn't hold my breath. In an update to the story about Stryker that I covered last week, it has now been confirmed that only internal systems were impacted. No medical devices owned by customers are at risk, which is good news. But Stryker emphasizes that the incident was not a ransomware attack and that the threat actor did not deploy any malware on its systems. BleepingComputer.com reports that the threat actor used the wipe command in Intune, Microsoft's cloud-based endpoint management service, which I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast already knows about, to erase from nearly 80,000 devices between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. UTC on March 11th. So that's interesting because there were social media posts saying 200,000, which didn't seem right. It seemed early indications, at least from people that seemed to be in the know, was about 20,000, but it looks like 80,000 devices were impacted, which pretty hefty. And I know I shared someone, kind of joking, hey, they were able to achieve this at scale this quickly, and it takes me an hour just to roll out an update with Intune or something to that effect. But it looks like really it was over 3 hours and 80,000 devices, which still impressive speed for Intune. Investigators reportedly did not find any indication that data was exfiltrated, which is also interesting because you'd expect that they would take the data before launching their attack. But also, maybe it's not that surprising since this is an Iranian hacktivist group, and maybe their main intention was just to cause chaos, and they're not interested in the data per se. The investigation is being carried out by the Microsoft Detection and Response team in collaboration with cybersecurity experts from Palo Alto's Unit 42. The business impact is huge, though, and they say their main focus is on resuming shipping and transactional services, and customers are encouraged to maintain normal communication with company personnel while the infrastructure is being steadily recovered. I feel like this is going to be one of those kind of doomsday type examples and cases that people share. Now, I did see a bunch of posts on the cybersecurity subreddit with people saying that like their infosec executives were concerned and want them to consider moving away from Intune because of this, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. I understand that Intune was used to wipe the devices, but why wouldn't you be looking more at Entra, since it seems like that's where they gained access and that's how they were able to actually remotely initiate this request with enough permissions in Intune to wipe the devices. But of that, how are you going to move away from Entra? We're using Active Directory. And hey, if you're going to an alternative to Intune, are you integrating with Entra? You're a little bit snooker there, buddy. Rethink your plan and don't react with emotion. I'm not sticking up for Microsoft when I say that, but that sentiment from these people who should really know better, and it's concerning that they don't, is frankly ridiculous. OpenAI have recently told bleepcomputer.com that ChatGPT ads are not yet rolling out outside the US, even though some users have noticed references to ads in the updated privacy policy. While the article that I'm referencing for this story suggests that OpenAI does not share your conversations with ChatGPT advertisers, which means advertisers do not have access to your chats, chat history, memories, or personal details, I personally would be cautious because maybe the reason that they're taking this approach of not rolling out outside the US initially is due to data privacy laws and concerns. So if that is the case, then I would take what they're saying with a large pinch of salt. In a recent announcement, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella announced some leadership changes for Copilot, explaining the vision that includes 4 pillars: Copilot Experience, Copilot Platform, Microsoft 365 apps, and AI models. Jacob Andrew will lead the Copilot experience across consumer and commercial, driving design, product growth, and engineering as EVP Copilot, reporting directly to Satya Nadella. Ryan Roslansky, Perry Clark, and Charles Lamana will lead Microsoft 365 apps and the Copilot platform. And said that together, Jacob, Ryan, Charles, and Perry, and Mustafa, and it said that together they will make up the Copilot leadership team. And over the next few months, they'll work to align the teams together with Mustafa, who's already currently the AI head at Microsoft. That's Mustafa Suleyman. The publicly published brief explained, quote, progress at the AI model layer is more critical than ever to our success as a company over the next decade and is foundational to everything we build above it. We are doubling down on our superintelligence mission with the talent and compute to build models that have real product impact in terms of evals, COGS reduction, as well as advancing the frontier when it comes to meeting enterprise needs and achieving the next set of research breakthroughs. Mustafa Suleiman and I have been working together towards this plan for some time, and he will continue to lead this high ambition work reporting to me. Mustafa is uniquely qualified to drive this forward with his deep focus and commitment to advancing the frontiers of model science, while also ensuring that human control, agency, and economic opportunity remain at the center of these advancements. End quote. Yeah, and best of luck to that team. Obviously, there's a continued huge push and focus on AI at Microsoft. Ars Technica has reported that in 2024, the federal government of the US's cybersecurity evaluators rendered a troubling verdict on one of Microsoft's biggest cloud computing offerings, which appears to be Microsoft's Government Community Cloud High, which is a suite of cloud based services intended to safeguard some of the US government or nation in general's most sensitive information. Ars Technica reported on ProPublica's sharing of a report that they reviewed. And in that report, it was stated that Microsoft's, quote, lack of proper detailed security documentation, end quote, left reviewers with a, quote, lack of confidence in assessing the system's overall security posture, end quote. One member of the team reportedly put it, quote, the package is a pile of shit, end quote. Despite the concerns, Ars Technica suggests to the FedRAMP team turning Microsoft down didn't seem like an option. A summary document reportedly stated, quote, not issuing an authorization would impact multiple agencies that are already using GCCH, end quote. The team determined that it was a better value to issue an authorization with conditions for continued government oversight. Now, I feel like I've been slipping into the politics lane too much. Unfortunately, it has not been something I can avoid on the podcast just because there's been so much craziness and it's just overlapped into this space. But I'll try not to go too deep on this one. I'll just say that there are inferences made by Ars Technica in their article about changes to FedRAMP in recent times and governance. And if you are interested in that, I suggest you check out the article for yourself, and I'll share that with this episode, which is episode 431, and you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com. Or you can actually find a link to it in the description for this episode on YouTube. Ending the podcast this week with an absolutely wild story, which frankly I'm a little bit skeptical about, despite the fact that it was actually featured pretty much everywhere, including on The Scientist, on Australian news, and even by the Irish national broadcaster RTE. But in the story, an Australian tech entrepreneur allegedly created a personalized cancer vaccine for his dog, Rosie. Now, stories have been calling it a vaccine, but in reality, the way that I interpret it, it's more like a medication or treatment. The story goes that his dog had tumors and had had surgery and chemo, but it did not have the desired effect. Desperate to save his dog's life, he started spitballing solutions with ChatGPT, which led him to contacting a local university to sequence his dog's DNA and then mapping out, the parts that were still healthy or good, and then essentially created an mRNA vaccine utilizing some of the good cells left in the dog. This was all guided by ChatGPT, and the result was a personalized treatment, allegedly that reduced some of the largest tumors by half. So I think it's more of a treatment. Yes, it was using mRNA, but a vaccine to me would be preventative, whereas this was more reactive because the dog had already had the tumors and had surgery and chemo. So, I mean, regardless, this is a pretty cool story. But unfortunately, while reducing the tumors will not ultimately save the dog's life, but unfortunately, of course, reducing the tumors will not ultimately save the dog's life. But the tech entrepreneur said, quote, I think it's added considerable lifespan and health span to Rosie, end quote. So pretty staggering what could be achieved with the help of ChatGPT. Now, obviously, this is a tech entrepreneur, so it's someone with money. Interestingly, I would have thought, yeah, maybe you could do this for a dog, but of course you couldn't do it with a human. But even for a dog, it did require some permissions because I'm sure there's animal cruelty laws in place in Australia that might prevent you just doing this kind of thing willy nilly. So those permissions did have to be sought and approved. But again, this is probably not a massive obstacle for someone who has money. So unfortunately, this is not going to be something that just anyone can do for their own dog. But now, this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. I'll keep it short this week again, but I saw a great video from the awesome Meryl Fernando on how to migrate from legacy VPNs to Entra Private Access. So, if you're looking to possibly cut ties with your legacy VPN, which you probably should be this day and age, they're problematic. And in my experience, they do not tend to perform all that well at scale. Then this is a great episode to check out because it also has the awesome Richard Hicks as co presenter. But once again, thank you so much for listening to this episode.